my care at home isn't enough and making a decision for care somewhere else. So, and of course the government knows that. So it was cheaper from the government's perspective to keep people in a residential. Basically, if you can keep more people in the same area, you can provide care at a more efficient rate, basically. And not all states use the money well. My experience in Queensland, Joe Biocchi basically didn't believe any of the government services should pick up funding for caring for people at home. And I think that's been very successful for them because all the money has gone into that community bucket to keeping people at home. New South Wales, a lot of that money actually went into the government services, which is not a problem in my mind. But I know that coming back to New South Wales, community care, which is probably the area that I love the most, is quite challenging, mainly because a fair bit of that money has gone back into the hospital service rather than out in the community. Just a personal view. But you don't see any big community services like you do in Queensland and New South Wales. So that's the interesting thing. So residential services, late 80s, the legislation changed quite a bit. It allowed services to take people straight off the street and have them care for people. So there was unions disagreed with this in a big way, particularly the Nurses Association. They effectively said that they didn't believe that quality of care would actually happen through this. So they actually instigated a big research in 1989 to actually prove that, and they ran it for 3 years to prove that it wouldn't work well. And they got egg on their face because what the research showed was that the quality of care increased. Now, what do you think the reason for that was? If you've got someone that comes off the street that absolutely knows nothing, and they sit down and have a chat to you and have a cup of tea, as opposed to a nurse that's worried about your clinical care, who do you think you're going to appreciate more? But the trouble with that is that they lost 30% of their membership with that argument. So 30% of the people that would have been with the Nurses Association went to the HSU. So why that is interesting, that disagreement continues, and it's still an argument today, who belongs to who and what the workload looks like. And each of those unions will actually put up things that are wrong and happening in the community as to why it should change. So they don't have an interest in seeing aged care working well. And that's kind of something that happens behind the scenes that a lot of people don't know. So it's quite a challenge. In 1997, we saw the Residential Aged Care Act come into force, and it was a fairly powerful piece of legislation caring for people, as it should. And there's a lot of regulation around what we do. It's quite stifling. The first one is the Vulnerable Persons Act, and that basically mandates that if we see anything of a sexual nature or of abuse whatsoever, we have to report that within 24 hours. Sometimes we don't even know what's going on, but we know something's going on, so we report it. And there's an obligation to report that to police and the department. What happens to the staff member is also mandatory. They're taken offline. They're actually sent home, pending an investigation, and that's devastating for them if they've done nothing wrong. So I guess my experience in the last 10 years, I've reported 14 times, and of that, 3 of them were people that are no longer in aged care because of them doing the wrong thing. So that's the kind of stuff that you see on the telly that's happening. So in saying that 14, it's not too much, but I would say that on a weekly basis, I would deal with families where the issue is that loved ones, supposed loved ones and relations are actually taking money. And that is my hardest area to work in. And the reason for that is that as you get older, well, I'm generalising because it's been my experience, is that we get less worried about money. And so we're not too worried about taking action. As long as I've got enough money to look after myself until I'm gone. I don't really care. So that's the challenge I find, because concerns are raised, money is going out the door, and there is some action I can take, obviously. But generally people say, well, I'm okay with that because they're loved ones and family and whatever, and I'm okay that they'll get the money when I'm not here anyway. And I go, well, what do you want me to do with it? And that is, for me, the biggest challenge. And it happens more than you think. It's quite scary. Then we have the Food Authority. Now, the Food Authority can basically close you down at any time. And we are visited once a year, every 12 months, if we are doing well. If we have an A rating, it's once every 12 months. If we have a B rating, it's once every 6 months, and it goes down from there. So, again, they're about keeping people safe, which is fine, but also some very strict guidelines around that, which makes it very difficult providing food for residents in terms of, food that they're used to eating all their life, and how we might produce that. And then we have the quality standards, which are basically you as a service, as a rack, as they say, because some services will have 3 racks within their actual service. For every rack, you have at least 2 unannounced visits where they'll just turn up and spend the day with you checking a particular area. And every 3 years, which we're just moving into, they'll have an unannounced accreditation where they will look at absolutely everything over 3 days. So quite arduous, the things that we work under. 2014, we saw the Living Longer, Living Stronger legislation came in, which is basically looking at increasing funds for keeping people at home, which is fantastic. The UK experience was that in 13 years, there was no what we would call low care residents in a residential service. And the admissions were mainly around behaviour and memory support care. So effectively, being able to care for someone at home just becomes so challenging, and tends to be the areas. And those people then need residential care. So for us, it's a very changing clientele and skill mix that we need to cater for. And it's the areas that we actually receive the less money for as well. So it's a double-edged sword for us from a residential perspective. So you have decreased funds coming through and changing acuity. Now what that means for us is that if you go back 10 years, the main reason for why people came into a residential service was actually for security reasons. Lost husband, lost wife, not feeling safe at home, wanted to be in an environment where I felt safe, and there was some social programs happening around that. I think that suits me. That was the reason 10 years ago. And people would stay for an average of 16 years. That was the average length. Today, it's totally about whether you are able to stay at home from a care perspective. An average length is 6 to 8 months. So that decision has been made very late. So for us, I can give you the Clelland experience. In the last 3 months, 24 residents have passed away. So the impact on staff is enormous because they feel like this is my family, this person's now passed away, and everything else, quite a sad time. So it's an enormous change. Just a bit on finance, and I'll put up front, I'm not an expert in this area whatsoever, so you can, probably some experts in here that can shoot me down, no problems at all. Basically, if you're looking at coming into a service, you pay a bond over 5 years, and that's just under $16,000. That's the cost. And it's considered not an asset. And it attracts a government interest rate around, it's just under the 5.8% at the moment. Now, the challenge with that, down the bottom I've got Clelland, $450,000 is the bond at the moment. Now, I've only been at Clelland just over 2 years, and I've moved that from the lowest, 220 in the Shoalhaven area, to the highest. And there's been a bit of criticism around that in terms of why would I do that when we seem to be caring for people that are marginalised. Now, the reason why I've done that is that the government doesn't allow you to negotiate up, but they'll allow you to negotiate down. So we have people that are actually, with a bond, have to sell the family home, and they've got a bucket load of money, around $450,000. Where do they put it? If they put it anywhere in the bank, it's considered an asset, and the consequences of that. So what I've done is tried to give the flexibility for people to actually put that into a bond. It's not counted at that higher interest rate, and I can negotiate that price down. But if you don't understand that, it doesn't look good. If you don't have a bond, it's regulated by Centrelink. And for Clelland at the moment, people that don't have a bond, around just under 45% of that people. And that is all regulated by Centrelink. So every aged care facility, the finance is regulated by the Commonwealth. And we all do the same thing. The only choice we've got is the bond. So it takes the issue away from us in terms of finance, except that it's incredibly complex. And you need a good solicitor or someone like that that understands that to look at your own situation to help you through that. Give you an idea, I left the hospital in 2008. Now, 2007, if you went into a medical ward and knowing that you would have someone that might be 26 years old beside you, 32-year-old beside you, so you wouldn't be, the medical ward wouldn't be full of people over 65 and over. The cost per day that was given to that to look after you is $860 back then, so it'd be up now. There was no validation. No one came to see whether you were getting good care, bad care, whether it was appropriate to what you needed or anything. It was just an automatic fund, no one asking questions. Aged care at that time was $209 maximum. And that maximum was based on what your care needs were. And it's now $214, but the government has actually changed all the rules in terms of being able to get that. So it is a lot harder to actually get the $214. It's so hard that for effectively a 100-bed facility, we know that over the next 5 years, the government's going to claw back $200,000 a year off that. So very challenging. The reason why the government thinking ahead in terms of what's happening is basically our population. And as you can see there, it's effectively looking at increasing to 15.3%. So, and that's with the life expectancy increasing. So the government's worried about how we're going to pay for this, and effectively, if you read between the lines, it's trying to move towards fee for service, which is not too palatable for all of us. So that's a problem. One of the huge pieces of research done last year is called the Aged Care Roadmap, and one of the things they talked about there is basically people in terms of selling the family home and how that can be used. And the government actually decided that they did not want to go there whatsoever because that would scare people. And yet there's a fairly big squeeze for all of us to move to fee for service. That just gives you an idea of what's going to happen. And that's the baby boomers coming through. So the problem for aged care facilities is that let's go out and build facilities that look after people, and there'll come a time where it actually just drops down. And what do we do with those facilities? So there's a bit of a reluctance to actually build for the future as well. So I think this is the slide for the Royal Commission that's happening. I think they actually should look at the 65% of 65 and over population expectation between 2011 and 30. Loneliness. Now, loneliness is an interesting concept. That is going to be our biggest predictor of problems. And the reason for that is that if you've got children, you know that they're more wanting to be alone by themselves. So what does that mean in the future? In fact, it's very interesting. Clelland has single rooms and with ensuite, so it's not, I haven't noticed that there. But coming from other facilities where there are 4-bed and 2-bed units, it's quite interesting that people wanting to go into that are actually happy to go into that. because of the socialisation, someone to talk to, etc. Whereas their children will argue, no, I don't want that from my mum and dad. So you can already tell how that's going to change in the next 10 years or so. And the definition of loneliness is the fact of if you're not able to provide something that has meaningful to you in terms of a task or a job for someone else, then you're suffering from loneliness. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The challenges I've talked to, increasing and changing needs within a decreasing government funds, lack of skilled staff. And that lack of skilled staff comes from the perspective of we're still able to take people straight off the street and train them. And how quickly can you do that? Now, we have moved, and most services have, that we won't take anybody on board that doesn't have the Cert 3. But the Cert 3 is 3 months of training, and they tend to be young people, and that's fantastic, but there isn't a lot of training resources within the services to actually look at working at that, and that heavy regulation from the government perspective is looking like getting worse rather than less, so that's the challenge moving forward. I thought I'd include this because it's an interesting slide, and the interesting thing is the date, 1980, when I first got this. And that was the vision for health in 2000. And what they were arguing is that a lot of services, particularly church services in that dependency line, look at the referral flow as you sort of come from your church community as a one straight line. And from a health perspective, that's what the World Health Organization believes to be the right thing. Now, many years ago, the government implemented a gatekeeper which is called the ACAP team. And in 1980, what that created was that 75% of people that went into aged care came from a hospital environment, 15 from GP, and 3 self. 2018 hasn't changed. About 80% of people still come from hospital. So it just gives you an idea of one of the problems we have. So Fresh Hope has done some focus groups with older people just to find out what they feel, and they're quite interesting. That we want, in terms of She'll Be Right and the Fair Go, creates a problem for us as we get older because we've got decreasing control, and that impacts on who we are as a nation. But we've always been fairly inquisitive about technology, and now it's actually, we're all using it very differently, and we need to be able to use that more. And recognising that, and that was out of some research that KPMG did, that the group, in terms of looking for residential care as a population, is as diverse as the population themselves. And yet we try and sort of bring people into the same kind of way we do business. So being connected is a human being thing. So again, that isolation and the loneliness comes into there. And so staying connected is really, really important. If you're looking at coming into residential care, bring everything and anything that you do now with you. That's really important. No one likes to be old, and I hear it time and time again. I don't want to go and spend time with people. I'm not that old. And you'll hear that from a 100-year-old. And it's beautiful. And so now I guess I just put down the bottom, what's the view of children and loved ones? Because here you are, if you're being faced with the decision of going into a residential care and you're trying to maintain how you feel, that's not the perspective that your children and loved ones are coming from. They're coming from the perspective that you'll be cared well. And there's a gap there. There's a big gap there. So this is from an Aboriginal activist group that I thought it felt that it kind of fits quite nicely. If you come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I'll give you a great example of that. It happened about 3 weeks ago. A lady in Clelland, lovely lady, has all the faculties, mobile, doing all her own thing. We present to every resident at Clelland with a podiatrist service, and that podiatrist goes every 6 weeks and asks everyone, would you like your toes and feet done? And she consistently refused to have her toenails done. That was her thing. And we knew that, the family knew that. Suddenly she got unwell and went into hospital. Now, we got a complaint from the hospital because we didn't care for this lady's toes. And it was a significant complaint. They were really, really onto us about, and you go, well, you know, in a nutshell, that explains it all. I mean, we were respecting her right. The family knew. Certainly her toenails could have done with a cut, but isn't it her right? I don't know where that lies. That's the challenge. There's a fair bit of work around human flourishing, and basically it really is about that whole concept of bringing community in with you. It's very important. I don't know if you're aware, but there's a place in Hobart in Tasmania that are actually looking at building a whole city, everything that you need for people as a residential care service, and I just think that's fantastic. That's the kind of things that are happening. So for us at Clelland Lodge, we're basically broadly just trying to understand people as individuals, looking at the concept of community coming in with them. Our volunteer team are absolutely amazing because they're really important in terms of that process. And from a business sense, if you're in residential, you've only got two choices. You have to be based on cost or based on being unique. Now, considering all the costs are exactly the same for every facility there is, it's very hard to be a low-cost service. There's a lot of services that are in the media that have tried to be a high-cost service and not necessarily getting right because the department is saying, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that. So the only choice we've got is to be unique. And I guess that's what we're striving for. And for me, I'm working on these concepts. The resident basically, what is important for us is trying to mimic what they did every day of their life. And that's based on, that's all we know about caring for people with particularly dementia care. Everything we know about people with dementia comes out of some work that happened in Ireland, and was around 80 nuns that lived in the monastery. And over 75% of them had severe dementia, yet no one noticed because they were doing the same thing every day. And they loved it, enjoyed it, and no one knew any different. So that's what we're trying to do. Trying to move away from medications and all those kind of things because they just cloud the brain and make things worse. But, you know, that's a challenge for us. Particularly if you've got behaviours, the immediate thing is to say we need to control that, and the immediate things that particularly doctors think of, and registered nurses to a certain extent, is medication. I don't agree with that, but that's where we need to change the world. Now, there's a pretty good research program coming out of the UK, which is supported by Wollongong University in terms of practice development. And it effectively says to provide good care for residents, you need to be ensuring that decisions are made as close to them as possible, and that carers are able to provide and receive feedback. Because if they can't do that, they're just going to do whatever they think is right rather than what the resident wants. All makes sense. But as a leader, in an environment where you get crucified the minute you make a mistake, how comfortable are you going to be to actually look at supporting that? So it's quite a challenging area. And I think we should be aiming for, and this is again a big research coming out of Northern Ireland about flourishing communities. And probably the biggest thing there for me is that they've got a target which is interesting, that 75% of residents are completing a task or a job that's meaningful for them every week. And we should be aiming to try and do that. So again, that's where our volunteers and all the people that come into Clelland Lodge are absolutely crucial, because it allows us to do some of those kinds of things. So in a bit of a broad nutshell, that's effectively where I'm coming from Clelland's perspective. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you, Michael. It was very interesting. And on behalf of Probus, I'd like to present you with a pen. This is made by one of our members. And thank you very much. Thanks.